welcome back to Happy Apple Core Homestead. Today we are going to talk about when and how to harvest and cure potatoes. I'm going to send you out to the garden with me in just a minute and give you all the information you need to know, and at the very end I'll answer some widely asked questions. Okay, see you in a minute. Alright friends, we are outside now to harvest the potatoes. I'm just going to take you along and show you how much we have. So this whole entire bed here, this whole bed here, and this whole giant bed all the way down to the end. Now you're going to know when it's time to harvest your potatoes when the foliage has all fallen over and has started to die back. Like this one is a very good example. Even though there is a little bit of green here on a couple, I'm going to harvest them today for two reasons. One, I need the space to plant something else, and two, we have quite a bit of voles running around underground and they eat the potatoes. A lot of people like to just leave their potatoes in the ground all winter long and just grab them when they need them. That's a great way to store them if you don't have critters eating them, but I do, so in they go. In order to harvest your potatoes, you're going to want to pull up on your stalks if you have enough of them left to do so. If they're died back really far, you'll just be digging. Shake the dirt off and out comes the potatoes. And so there we go. Here's an example of one of my Yukons. Now once you get the foliage up, you're going to root around until you find all of the potatoes, and you will have to dig down a little bit. So just be aware of that and be gentle because these skins are super fragile. And if you're planning on storing them, you're going to want the skins to stay intact. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of these pulled up and I'll show you what we end up with at the end. I have this very large cart, one for the potatoes and one over there for the foliage, and I'll show you what we have after I'm all done. Okay, 4 hours later, here is what the garden beds look like. All harvested and also weeded while I was at it because I am going to plant something else here. Here's the big wheelie bin that I was using for the foliage, but I had to bring out the lawnmower with the big trailer because I filled that little thing up twice and it's easier to bring to the compost pile with the lawnmower. And here are all of the potatoes that I harvested today. These two bins up here are the small little potatoes, and I'll use those for roasting. But as you can see, these potatoes are quite big. They're bigger than my whole hand. So we got a lot of really large potatoes this year, and I would say that less than 5% of the potatoes were damaged by little critters. You can see I missed one here. And I will answer some questions about that at the end of the video, so stay tuned to that. I need to bring these up to the shed so that we can get them cured. I'll show you what that looks like. This cart is a little bit tippy with as heavy as it is. So I'm going to have to transfer these potatoes to something a little bit more stable. And once I do that and get up to the shed, I will see you again. I have brought the potatoes up to the shed. Let's take a look at the inside. If you watched my video on how to harvest and cure garlic, this room would be familiar to you. This is where we will set the potatoes. Obviously, I had harvested some a little bit earlier, as you saw by the kind of naked ground spot earlier on in the video. But we're going to set all the potatoes from that bin on these two shelves. The important thing about curing potatoes is 10 days. So keep that in the back of your mind. You want to cure them for at least 10 days. So you'll set them in a flat row somewhere very dark. That's why there's a dark covering over the window there. You want it to be dark and as cool as possible. Of course, nothing is air conditioned here in the Pacific Northwest. So this is the coolest spot we have. It's an insulated shed and it's fine. The most important thing is keep them out of the light. You're gonna lay them flat for 5 days, and then you're going to take every single potato and turn them over and let them rest for another 5 days, and then your potatoes are cured. At that point, you can choose to process them in any way you like or store them in any way you like. At the end of this video, I will talk to you about different storage methods. Of course, I only grow Yukon Golds, and we'll talk about the different types of potatoes and how well they store. My knowledge is for my zone, 8B in the Pacific Northwest. It may be different where you live. So make sure you do your research on that. I'm gonna go ahead and get these potatoes all lined up. I like to line them up kind of all the big ones together and then the little ones together, because these large ones here, I will can them. And then the small ones I'll use for just roasting potatoes throughout the winter season. And here we go. As you can see, I had to move some shallots out of the way, and both shelves are completely filled with potatoes. So on these two shelves, they're the large potatoes, which I will use for canning. And then we have 3 pretty good sized bins, like you can see from the size of my hand, like how big these bins are. These are smaller potatoes that we'll use for roasting and perhaps making some hash browns. And that's it for just the curing part. In 5 days, we will take everything on these shelves and flip them over. These I will process sooner. As you can see, all the baskets have holes in them for airflow. That's super important. If you don't have a flat place to put your potatoes, then at least put them in a basket that has holes. And for those of you who are interested, the shallots that I had up there, I put in an onion bag and I hung it from the wall where they can continue to cure as well, and they've got plenty of airflow, and I'll check on those regularly. Now let's head inside and answer some of your questions about potatoes, curing them, how to harvest them. I have tons of tips and tricks that you probably would like to know, so let's hop inside and we'll finish this up. Now that you know how to harvest and cure your potatoes, let's talk about some of the most frequent questions I get about growing potatoes. The first one is, my potatoes didn't flower. Are they okay? Yes, they're fine. Sometimes they flower, sometimes they don't. It doesn't matter, your potatoes will still grow, I promise. Next question is, I got little tiny green berries on my potato plant. Can I eat those? No, you cannot eat those. They contain things that will make you spit them out, called poison. Don't eat them. But you can grow potatoes from them, so if you want to save them, go for it. Another big question is, how do I keep my potatoes from turning green? Keep them covered. Simple as that. Keep them covered. And that might be hard when your plants are big and bushy and you can't see that they're poking up out of the dirt. So 2 ways you can combat that. You can grow your potatoes in the very beginning of the season in a hill. So you plant your potato and you hill up a bunch of dirt around the top. I never do that. What I do, the easy way, is I plant my potatoes, as you can see in some of my other videos. And then as the season goes on, I swim through the foliage, and if I see anything poking out, I cover them. You can cover them with existing dirt, compost, straw, whatever. Anything to keep the sun out, right? That is sufficient to keep your potatoes from turning green. But what if your potatoes do turn green? Can you eat them? Can you can them? Can you freeze them? And the answer to that is yes, you can eat them, preserve them, freeze them, can them, whatever, but cut the green off, right? Super important. Once it's green, it's super bitter. A lot of people are going to tell you how poisonous it is, but it wouldn't get past your mouth anyway. So if you do harvest a potato that has some green on it, cut it off. Easy as that. Next big question. Can you eat, preserve, or store potatoes that have rodent or other bug damage? And my answer is kind of depends on how extensive the damage is and what caused the damage. If you have a giant, beautiful potato that's like as big as your head or your palm, and it has a couple little, rodent nibbles on it, do you really want to waste all of that food because something nibbled on one little end? My answer is no. Now, because I like to cure my potatoes for a couple of months actually, even though you only have to cure them for 10 days, for me it's a couple months before I get around to canning. Anything that has a couple little rodent nibbles on it, those are the potatoes that I'm going to bring into the house. I'm going to chop off anything that rodent ate off of. I'm going to throw it in the trash or in the compost or whatever, probably the compost. And then I'm going to cook those and eat them here. So I'm not going to let those sit in my storage area for long periods of time because any damage to the skin or the potato can potentially cause rot over time. Now, if you've got those little worms, if you grow potatoes, you know what I'm talking about. That potato needs to go into your compost bin because by the time that the worms get to it, it's like half of the potato. It's a huge amount of rot on the one side. And unless you were starving, and you may be starving, if you're starving, go ahead, wash that potato, cut off all of the rotten stuff, scrub it really good, and go ahead and eat it. But as far as preserving, that's a no for me. It's not like mold on bread, right? You know how if you get a moldy loaf of bread, that mold spore kind of has tendrils that goes throughout the bread. Worm damage and rat nibbles are not like that. So it's not going to contaminate the rest of the potato. But often I found that when I have a potato that has worm damage, it's pretty extensive. And like the whole half of the potato where the worms are is pretty rotted out as it is. So those are just kind of a no-go for me. I think I mentioned earlier I had less than 5% of my potatoes that were damaged by rats, and I had less than 1% that had the worms. Now I do rotate my crops, and that does help with those little kind of wormies that like to get in there and eat those potatoes. But when you grow an organic garden, you are going to find pests and worms, right? Because everything has to eat. Oh my gosh, sorry about my phone. Those of you who watch my videos often know that I promised to turn my phone off, and so let me just do that right now. I am not being very good about keeping up with that promise, so I apologize to you all for the interruption. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, can you leave your potatoes in the ground all winter? Technically, the answer is yes. Now, for me, I'm in Zone 8B. I've got shrews and voles and rats, and so I harvest my potatoes as soon as humanly possible because they're just going to keep eating them. If that's their food source as well as it is mine. And so as soon as my foliage gets yellow, by the way, once your foliage is yellow, it's not bringing in the nutrients anymore down into the potatoes to grow them. So they're not going to get any bigger at that point. But you do want to wait until your foliage is at least yellow or brown, basically dead, right? So you know that there's no upper nutrients coming down to make those potatoes grow larger. A lot of people who live in different climates or have a different situation, they just like to leave their potatoes in the ground, and when they're ready for dinner, they just come and dig up a few and bring them into the house. If you don't have a pest problem, that's a good option for you, because then you don't have to find an additional way to store your potatoes. Plus, they will last longer out there in the ground, in a cold temperature, of course, than they would in a hot shed, right? Because we harvest our potatoes here in the Pacific Northwest in the summertime. So it's almost August now, and it's warm. The last thing I wanted to cover is, okay, now we've harvested our potatoes and we've cured them. Now what? How do we store them, right? You can can them, which is what I do because that's my favorite and they taste really delicious. You can check out my canning potatoes video for information on that. Canned potatoes are good roasted, fried, and mashed. That's my favorite. Yukon Golds in particular are delicious this way. That is the type that I grow. You might run into some complications if you're growing some blue or purple potatoes as far as like the color change once you can them. But definitely Yukons do great canned, and they also do great frozen, turned into hash browns and then frozen. Again, I've got a video on that. Check out my hash browns video if you want to make your own hash browns at home. I can promise you that my method is better than just shredding a raw potato onto a skillet. I promise you. Okay, so back to what I was saying. How do you store them? You can can them, you can turn them into hash browns and freeze them. You can actually roast them and then freeze them. Also good. I've done that before. It's not my favorite, but I've done it and it works well. If you have a root cellar, you can put them in your root cellar. Now, kind of depending on where you live, what your climate is like, and whether or not you have a root cellar. I don't. I have a crawl space under my house. And so there have been years where I have taken my potatoes and I put them in quite a large metal trash can. And I put it in the crawl space underneath the house, which does stay moderately cooler than the rest of, the house and outside. And what I would do is I'll put them in an onion bag. So those, they're red onion bags. They've got lots and lots of holes in them. And then I would layer the bags of potatoes with a layer of straw, bag of potatoes, layer of straw, so that they can get airflow through them. Also, there are holes in the metal can. So rodents can't get in, because occasionally a rodent might get into your basement or crawl space area. So you want to make sure that they can't get to your food supply. So the metal can works great for that, but still you need airflow. So you're going to want to drill holes throughout the can. Now this method also works great if you want to dig a hole in your yard and bury a can. So that would probably be even colder and cooler than a crawl space or a basement. Again, you have to make sure that you protect the entire thing from critters, and you will need to check it, whether it's in the crawl space or in a hole in the ground, this metal can I'm talking about. You're going to need to check it probably monthly to make sure there's no rot. So you get one rotten potato, right? So let's just say you're putting everything in and you don't notice that one is nicked. Well, that potato is going to rot faster than your fully intact potatoes. And if that potato is on the bottom, that rot is going to spread very quickly to the rest of your potatoes, and then your whole supply is bad, right? So if you're storing your potatoes in bulk, whether it be in a root cellar or your crawl space or a hole in the ground, you are going to want to open that up, check on them regularly. Eventually, no matter where you store them, they will start to grow long tendrils, which are called eyes. Once they get long, they look like very thick hairs. Those are potatoes that you can then plant later. So hang on to those. Don't throw them away because you can plant them for your next season. That's all I can think of off the top of my head as far as like questions on how to, deal with potatoes. But there's probably other questions that you have, so pop them down in the comments. I'll make sure to respond to you. And also, while you're at it, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Hit the like button if this video was interesting or helpful or useful to you. And also, I will put in the description box my Etsy channel. The things that I sell on my Etsy channel are super, super effective. So check them out, get something for yourself. And if you want my recipes and things like that, hit the join button and become a member. If you're not interested in all of that, but you want to support this channel, please do hit the join button, hit that $2.99 button, and just help me keep this channel going. All right, friends, I'll see you next time. Bye.